know, a few days ago, I wouldn't have even thought about doing a video on the king of cucks, Maddox. But today, I noticed a video from 4 months ago, yeah, I know, real relevant, where Maddox preempted my far too long call-out video of the media as being unethical and directly and flagrantly disrespecting the code of ethics that I know for a fact they had to learn as undergrads while getting their journalism degrees. Anyway, Maddox released this video a while ago, a rare occasion actually, specifically to felate the legacy media while attempting to discredit alternative news sources as fake news that aren't held to any standards, completely incorrect, through a weak attack on InfoWars and some website no one's ever heard of. But that's actually beside the point. Having seen this old video, I was reminded of the decline and fall of this man, and I am left without any other option in my brain than to absolutely roast and destroy Maddox. A man I once looked up to, a man I once found both intelligent and hilarious, a man who I in fact stood up for when he made a video defending the term cuck because I thought he was just defying it. And I am here today to tell you, although many of you may already know it to be so, Maddox, aka George Ouzounian, the balding Armenian narcissist, is in fact a cuck in every possible sense of the word, and he may very well just be the comedian Cucknary in the coal mine for what happens to you when you abandon all and everything that you have in favor of pointless virtue signaling. Let this be a warning to all the comedians out there that would rather screech and cry about social justice than be what they should be, entertaining. For those who don't know, let me first explain who Maddox is. Maddox was probably the first major satirist on the internet. He launched his website in 1997, taking his name from the anime Metal Skin Panic Maddox 01, which if you haven't seen it is fucking sick. Check that shit out too. Also, evidence of this man's good taste at least 20 years ago. Now, I was 7 when Maddox launched his website, the best page in the universe. But by the mid to late 2000s, I was one of many people who enjoyed reading his posts, and he was quite popular before then, where he plays an incredibly egotistical, unpolitically correct character, often dripping with sarcasm and satire. In 2006, he published his first book, The Alphabet of Manliness, a book that goes through the alphabet letter by letter to point out different manly things, and which was a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Let's take a look at a few of Maddox's articles, thankfully still available on his 20-year-old website. Here we can see some examples of Maddox speaking very negatively about feminism as far back as 1998. In fact, he even goes so far as to debunk the wage gap. You can see why people like myself were attracted to this sort of honest and edgy humor. The first day I found Maddox's website, I read every single article on it. Here in 1999, we have an article where he insults both Republican and Democrat parties equally, which he has done many times. He also insults vegans. Additionally, here's an article with him straight out insulting, in his own words, feminazis. In 2000, here we have him trashing Rosie O'Donnell, a favorite pastime of my boy Donald Trump, calling her an agenda-pushing bitch, which is exactly what Trump said. He also, again, mocks both the right and the left. And honestly, George Bush Jr. was a neocon mental invalid, and very much worthy of rebuke. But Aiden, you say, 2000 was 17 years ago. People can change a lot in that time. Absolutely. So let's examine some more recent postings of his. So here he is talking about women's fashion and how ugly these baggy shirts are, and they kill his boner, saying it makes them look pregnant. That's from 2009. Even more recently, in 2013, he eviscerated Gamergate with this video.
Yeah, no shit. Why would you expect men to do a good job of representing the female point of view in media? We don't identify with being female. Criticizing men for not representing women or their interests accurately in video games is like criticizing women for not representing men in their magazines. When's the last time you saw a gun on the cover of Cosmopolitan? Or a car on the cover of Vanity Fair? Or muscle building tips in Glamour?
And then there's this one from 2016. I mean, this one's low-hanging fruit about sexy Halloween costumes, only provocative and offensive to the most triggered of SJWs. Oh wait, but there was that Berkeley riot about Milo talking about costumes. Anyway, it's a shit video and what I believe was a weak attempt to maintain he can still produce something edgy. Even though, sorry, sexy costumes are rather smooth and edgeless, George. But anyway, we know these are the types of things he's posted for basically the entire course of his comedy career. And Maddox posts to his website very infrequently. His posting has become less and less frequent since he started a podcast with Dax Herrera, aka Dick Masterson, in 2014 called The Biggest Problem in the Universe. Before I go further, let me introduce you to Dick. Dick is also an internet satirist who has gained fame from his appearance on the Dr. Phil show, while playing a satirical, misogynistic, chauvinistic character and managed to trigger a bunch of fat women in one of the most hysterically hilarious media segments ever recorded. Let's watch. I don't care if you've seen this particular clip before, he did this a couple times. Odin knows I've seen it countless times, but it always makes me laugh.
More liberating and freeing to a woman than chauvinism. A woman has no responsibilities because I don't expect her to get anything right. All women are whores. They trade sex for money, they trade sex for cars. How is prostitution illegal, but alimony isn't? They're basically the same thing. You're paying for the whore to leave. A penny saved is a woman fired. Women make horrible employees. Women should not be allowed to vote. It's ridiculous. A woman president would be a disaster. Women know in their hearts that women cannot make decisions. A woman would never vote for Hillary Clinton. She embarrassed herself by not pleasing her man, essentially. And women know it. Oh, women are only good for having kids. Unfortunately, they're not very good at raising them. Hitler was raised by a single mother. Men have created everything you see in the world. Men invented electricity. Men invented cures for diseases. Every brick you see is there because a man put it there. The only thing women really do with their time is spend men's money. Men, this is what you look like to a woman. This is all they're after. Women can't do math. They can't be organized. Can't lead a company. They can't take risks. They can't drive for crap. You can't blame women for what they do wrong in the same way that you can't blame a dog for what it does wrong. It's your fault for not training it properly.
Amazing, right? So Dick had worked with Maddox on a canned reality show, Manformation for Spike TV, a show all about manliness, which is how they presumably became acquaintances. Again, this was 2010, so we know Maddox held these un-PC opinions to the point of wanting to create a show about masculinity at least up until 2010, and certainly at least somewhere beyond that, considering he would later reach out to Dick, who wrote a book called Men Are Better Than Women, to start a podcast together. By the way, let me give you some context. The Man Show starring Adam Carolla and Jimmy Kimmel was on air from 1999 to 2004, so being proud of masculinity wasn't exactly as problematic in 2010 as it would become by, say, 2016. Anyway, the premise of the Biggest Problems podcast was that both Dick and Maddox, both comedians, both satirists, would bring in something they thought was a problem. For example, social justice warriors. The second top problem. And the listeners would vote on whose problems were more important, with the comedic goal of determining the biggest problem in the universe. By the way, as it stands, it's anti-vaxxers. Moving forward, let's talk about the Biggest Problems podcast. While I had previously always believed that the narcissistic personality of Maddox was a character, as the show moved into dozens of episodes, it started to become increasingly obvious that the intellectual narcissism was not a fictional piece of satire, but really an intrinsic part of Maddox's personality. Moreover, as time went on, the new apparent leftist politics Maddox began to adopt started to come out. While he previously mocked both sides, it seemed as though, particularly in his opinion towards Trump and several other things, that he was still living in 2004 when it was trendy to mock George Bush Jr. I say this because of the 80th episode of the Biggest Problems podcast, where he smeared Trump for something like 30 minutes, taking quotes out of context and talking over Dick, who he knows is a Trump supporter. Hilariously, as became more and more frequent on the Biggest Problems podcast as time went on, fewer and fewer people voted for Maddox's problems, and more people voted for Dick's, which, in the case of the Trump episode, was shitting after you shower. Yeah, look at this vote disparity. The people wanted Dick, and they showed that digitally with their votes against Maddox's Trump problem. When I say Maddox is stuck in 2004, let me clarify a bit. In 2004, yes, there were many problems in the United States, including the housing market crash, the economic depression, the war in Iraq, etc. But at least perhaps because of 9/11, there was this sense of unity and community among the American people, and part of that unity was actually in our capacity to make fun of George Bush for being a simpleton, which he was. He was a globalist idiot, and while many of us rallied behind him for him supposedly protecting the nation, he was also a very easy target for ridicule. The political climate of 2004 is not, and was not, the political climate of 2016. Okay, George? Unemployment is way up, trust me, when you look at the people who have absolutely given up looking for work work, it's skyrocketed. Europe is burning under unvetted, open borders immigration. Race tensions are worse than they have been since the civil rights era. The nation has more than doubled its debt. We have caused wars and destabilization in Syria and across the Middle East. We have destroyed our foreign relationships. We have eviscerated hundreds of thousands of blue-collar jobs. Social justice and feminism seek to destroy and corrode freedom of speech, and the media is now so openly untrustworthy that only an utter troglodyte with no awareness of his surroundings would believe any word out of the mouth of Don Lemon. That, Maddox, is where we are in 2017 and where we were in 2016, and as such, just trash-talking a political candidate who was very much speaking to the people concerned about those things and trying to make the same jokes you made in 2004, yeah, it's not gonna work anymore, which is why no one cared about your problem. You know, at first I was really confused about how this guy who had been so outspoken, so unpolitically correct, could have become such a leftist. And in November of 2016, after all this shit started, he released this video, which I initially assumed was sarcasm and humor, but now I believe that it was not sarcastic, but actually a satire of how he believes Trump administration and political views actually are. Here he is calling himself a regressive. Is that irony or just ignorance? I've begun to think Maddox was never really the clever guy we all thought he was, and he has proved his stupidity beyond just the Trump episode. I mean, I guess you could just blame it all on him moving to Los Angeles. That probably is the most likely cause. Anyway, moving on to the hot goss, and the decline and fall of once beloved internet comedian Maddox into virtue signaling hell. Sometime before the 77th episode, Dick and Maddox attended a wedding party together. At the end of the party, Dick, a notorious ladies' man, drove home with an ex-girlfriend of Maddox's. On episode 77, Maddox did not inform Dick as to when to show up, and as such, he did the podcast without him and instead with Asterios. Possibly, or quite perhaps very likely, pissed off that his co-host had flirted with a girl he had dated. And keep this in mind, folks, a girl he had dated years beforehand. This apparently caused a schism between the two, as many of the subsequent episodes were, at least in my opinion, subpar. Finally, Maddox chose to abruptly cancel the podcast on episode 107, which he did not invite Dick to, and during which he proceeded to thank every single person who had appeared on or helped with the show, except for one, the co-host, who you could argue had become the star, Dick Masterson. Dick then started his own podcast, The Dick Show, having garnered plenty of fans from The Biggest Problems, initially refusing to state why the first podcast had ended beyond creative differences. Shortly thereafter, a few Reddit posts emerged, wherein Dick had some choice things to say about Maddox, namely that Maddox was not his friend, that he is a cuck, and that he was controlling the show, particularly over his removal of this hysterical bit where Dick would play a few incremental seconds of Titanic, a movie that Maddox has never seen and yet despises, every time Maddox's problem lost to Dick's. Maddox has also started his own podcast network and essentially forced several guests, such as comedian and Biggest Problem veteran Asterios Kokkinos, from appearing on The Dick Show, lest they be denied a place on Maddox's network. Maddox also deleted the episodes of the Biggest Problem podcast for a time, and hijacked the RSS feeds of those subscribed to The Biggest Problems to download his new podcast. This kind of hostility built for some time until Maddox finally released this video, which he claimed was more or less designed to, in his own words, ruin Dick's personal and professional reputation. Let's go through it.
After the podcast ended, he said that I deleted the website. Not true. I created most of the content on the website. Why the fuck would I delete it? Dick's job was to maintain WordPress, and there were dozens of plugins that weren't being updated. He was negligent, so I converted the old site to static HTML, which is faster and more secure. I even paid for it myself out of my pocket. The old RSS feed costs money, guys, and can't stay up forever, so I uploaded all the files to SoundCloud so you can listen to them indefinitely. You're welcome.
Yes, Maddox, you did delete the episodes, and then you re-uploaded them, which screwed with a lot of people's RSS feeds. I was there. This is a lie by twisting Dick's words, when what he said was that you deleted the episodes, not the web page, you disingenuous arse.
He said he emailed me about this, and I didn't respond.
So I fire off an email to Maddox. Hey man, I got a big problem with this. Here's the feed link. So I get no response to that.
Huh, that's weird, because I definitely responded. Dick's been withholding financial records for me for quite some time, so I responded to him and asked him to send me those records. His refusal to send me these forms is suspicious, especially considering the fact that I found discrepancies in his accounting in the past.
Now about all of this tax shit, first of all, W-9s were not important to what Maddox is talking about in terms of accusing Dick of stealing money. Secondly, a Redditor accountant went through all of the tax records and found that it was actually Maddox who owed Dick money, something to the tune of like $5,000.
Then I found out that he was telling fans, without my knowledge, that it was okay to steal the bonus episodes, so I uploaded them all for free.
No, he didn't, asshole. After you kicked him from your show you co-hosted together for 2 years and severed all ties with him, he said he wouldn't discourage anyone from torrenting the bonus episodes. You making them free did nothing, dingus.
But it's misleading to say that I forbade the Titanic bit. That was one of my favorite bits on the show. I simply asked him not to tie it to the weekly voting because it would lead to a large number of fake votes in the database, and that's exactly what happened. So I asked him to find another way to do the bit on the show. In fact, I even sent him an email last December suggesting he bring the bit back.
So this shit about the Titanic bit is rather a he said, she said type of thing. She, of course, being Princess Maddox. But from everything I've heard from Dick and the audio engineer Sean, it sounds like Maddox really hated this bit and was just trying to get brownie points with his audience by claiming he didn't.
I've already started an awesome new podcast and most people love it. Some people don't, and that's okay. You're allowed to have bad taste. Oh, and one other thing. He used to complain about me editing the episodes. The reason I edited them is because he would say things that were incompatible with my values.
Really upsets me that that responsibility isn't put on her. We're telling people this.
I do want to add something just to the last point you made, which is they said that we should stop telling women that it's their responsibility to protect themselves.
It is.
Well, to an extent, yes.
100%
No,
it is.
Dick, it's not.
Dude,
you're
yes,
a
it
fucking
is.
bullshit. No,
No.
If you pass out drunk at a party or whatever, you shouldn't expect to get raped.
Yes, you fucking should.
Oh, dude, the big foul. No, you can't say that's fucking bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. And in case you don't think this is serious, his show's own message board maintains a rape list.
This is where I want to get into Maddox and the reason I'm making this video, because a lot of you are probably scratching your heads right now and asking, Aiden, why are you talking about this? Virtue signaling and being a pathetic lying cuck is no longer cool for comedians, if you ever thought it was, and it will lose you, your audience. So Dick says here that women should have a modicum of self-respect, at least enough to reasonably protect themselves from being raped. This is common sense. I'm sorry, but no one walks down a shifty-looking, ill-lit alleyway while flashing a roll of 20s who isn't looking to get robbed. I'm not saying girls who are raped are asking for it. It's absolutely not what I'm saying, and neither is Dick, far from it. We are saying that women have a personal responsibility to take some precautions. You cannot teach people not to rape, feminist, just like you cannot teach people not to murder. Rapists will rape, murderers will murder, thieves will steal. Do you get me? If you are going to a party alone, don't get tanked. How about that? And that's what Dick's talking about. But Maddox couldn't just leave it there. He points out a thread on the Dick Show's podcast's Reddit page, a post with a 0 like to dislike ratio, so clearly not popular, which he, by the way, erroneously calls the show's message board. Maddox, you've been on the internet forever, I think you know better. And then follows the link to a thread on 8chan containing a list of girls, including former Dick Show guests, that the poster supposedly wants to rape. 2 things. 1, anyone can make a board on 8chan. That's sort of the appeal of it, I guess. I've never really touched it. 2nd, all of these posts were made on the same day and likely by the same person. Odd, isn't it? The point is, Maddox was accusing Dick here of supporting rape through association. Maddox initially posted this video to YouTube, but quickly removed it as massive dislikes flooded in, and as such posted it to his private Facebook page, a page he knew was followed by many fans and friends of Dick's, as well as many people in the local LA comedy community. Dick was attacked by countless feminists and lefty cucks in the LA comedy scene, i.e. all of them, over this, which, like typical feminists, they took absolutely at face value without bothering to do any research into 8chan or the thread or the comments or anything whatsoever. But here's the thing, virtue signaling faggots, and here's the reason I want to talk about this. While Dick defended himself on the podcast and we, his fans, looked at the evidence he provided and the statements he made critically, most of us ultimately deciding that Maddox was completely in the wrong here and a piece of shit for constructing this fake narrative about Dick maintaining a rape list, if not possibly constructing all these posts himself. The attention regarding rape that Maddox brought upon Dick was very quickly thrown back in his face, as fans started to question him about the elements of his best-selling book, The Alphabet of Manliness. which contained several triggering and problematic quotations. For example, in the alphabet of manliness, the letter C stands for copying a feel, which many of his fans quickly brought up for how problematic it is to write about sexual assault in your book. Naughty Maddox. Mad Cucks was already deep in with his virtue signaling that he was the good guy for taking down evil rape apologist Dick Masterson. So what was his response? Why, he disavowed his own best-selling book. I'm not particularly proud of that book, not because of the content, although a lot of that sucks too, but because it wasn't very well written. It was my first book, and in it, I wrote a lame chapter largely based on the stop short episode of Seinfeld called Copying a Feel. I looked back on it today and cringed. I wrote it over 11 years ago and don't stand behind much of it today. I have never even read it from start to finish. The only two chapters I'm proud of are B for Boners and Urinal Etiquette, which are masterpieces and should be studied in a master's literature class. Real quick as an aside, before I tackle this pathetic display of cowering and self-flagellation, notice, if you will, that he claims his girlfriend was doxxed and treats that as a very serious threat, which doxing certainly can be, going to the police and whatnot. Yeah, the same girlfriend would a few months later post a private phone conversation with Asterios Kokkinos in an attempt to also ruin his personal and professional reputation because he had the audacity to not pick a side between Maddox and Dick. Bitch, you get no sympathy when you turn around and do the same type of thing to boisterous coconuts, aka the digital cyber demon, aka Grumblebee, a man who pissed off Wayne Brady by being funnier than him. Also, a bleeding heart liberal who wouldn't hurt a fly. Yeah, fuck you. Anyway, as you can see, Maddox completely disavowed his most successful book. His library of works includes other such gems as him mocking children's art, because it was PC and he's now all about being politically correct and virtue signaling to the other social justice warrior LA comedians. Just what a good guy he is. Although apparently, like that sexy costume video, he will occasionally walk back, particularly when it seems all his outlets are failing. But anyway, why is he such a good social justice warrior? Well, because he outed Dick as a rape apologist based on a post made on an anonymous image board and posted on the Dick Show Reddit as irrefutable proof of Dick's crimes. Except here Maddox says he's not responsible for the things people post on his page. Interesting double standard there. But anyway, Dick was blocked from being able to perform stand-up comedy at UCB, although strangely he's still listed on their website, and was booted from participating in Tournament of the Nerds because of these claims, which were quickly spread across the internet like wildfire. Look at this shit. Supposedly these SJWs even called his mother, all while Maddox sat back and continued to shit-talk him. So, why am I bringing up stupid internet drama that happened 4 months ago? Well, there's a very good reason why I'm calling Maddox the Cucknary in the coal mine for virtue signaling comedians. Let me first preface this by pointing out that when Maddox started the Biggest Problems podcast, he was a vastly more famous internet star than Dick. He was an internet sensation in the world of comedy. As such, you would think that his Patreon would be a hell of a lot more successful, yeah? And nope. The Dick Show podcast, $18,973 a month from 2,936 patrons, including this girl, versus the best debate in the universe and the Maddox Man Purse Network with $310 from 75 patrons. Do you know what's extra funny about that? This guy who satirizes and impersonates Maddox on Dick's show, calling himself Mad Cucks, actually makes more from his Patreon than the real deal. That's not all. Maddox's YouTube subscriber count started plummeting after all this, which makes sense as he started going into the descriptions of old videos and apologizing for using terms like metrosexual. Similarly, his Facebook and Twitter followers also plummeted, among other things to deal with people turning away from his repugnant virtue signaling. Maddox also fell for the Candid meme, a platform, for those of you who don't know, which claims to be about free speech, but is really just two AI developers testing a way to censor wrongthink. Check out Harmful Opinions videos on the topic, who was also recently on the Dick Show actually. I'll link below and I'll probably put a card up. Anyway, while the Dick Show is obviously doing much better and has frequently been listed in the top 200 podcasts on iTunes, Maddox has instead been trying to cheat the system by uploading his podcasts as comedy albums, and they still barely managed to eke out ahead of a 5-year-old Daniel Tosh record. Additionally, Maddox has resorted to implementing some sort of bizarre token system called Madbucks as currency to buy bonus episodes. Yeah, Maddox, every other podcast on the planet calls that a Patreon episode. But it's a last resort to try and keep his struggling network, funded by leather man bags and AI scams, afloat. It is truly a pathetic display of a dying literal cuckold grasping for relevance and e-bucks while not writing his book. Meanwhile, he has other members of his man purse network harass and dox people who will listen to the Dick Show as well as Dick's parents.
You are no longer allowed to be a fan of the Dick Show. As far as I'm concerned, it's like being a fan of Nazi Germany after the war. like Jan here. You just can't. You just can't. So I've managed now to take their money with last week and other ones who I think are still in the Patreon. I'm now taking their money. I ridiculed to her face. Greatest of all, I've made their group and their show even more inaccessible because they had to turn their group to secret so that no one could find it, which is what Dick was talking about in there. It's over for him. Now, let's go do the thing that even SJWs and weird internet trolls like me all agree on: doxing. Let's start doxing. Let's start giving out information about families. Let's start contacting families. You want to play this game? You want to play that game? Why don't we all start contacting your mom and seeing what she thinks about your behavior on the internet? Maybe finding some choice clips in your podcast and seeing what your mommy thinks about it.
Absolute petty rigmarole. This is why Maddox is the cucknary in the coal mines for comedians. When you decide to throw your previous comedy career and work into the garbage so as to embrace virtue signaling and social justice, you run the risk of befalling the very same fate as Maddox, a man who makes less money on Patreon than the guy mockingly pretending to be him. This is where the PC policing of humor will eventually take you. So to comedians like Patton Oswalt, who has frequently in the past spoken out about free speech for comedians, now posting how he is terrified of Trump. By the way, I was done with him after he shit-talked the adorable James Rolfe over Ghostbusters. Or Sarah Silverman, a woman who has worn blackface and made Holocaust jokes herself, now calling for a military coup. Maybe you should stop virtue signaling and take a look at your future. Take a look at Maddox and see what happens when you go full retard and you go full SJW. Yeah, for comedians, I wouldn't recommend it. Comedy is about pushing the limits and upsetting expectations. That is precisely why PewDiePie's Death to All Jews bit was hilarious. Comedians, get your dicks out of politics, unless you're able to actually be funny about it, like Steven Crowder or Dick Masterson. So in closing, I hope you enjoyed the Ballad of Maddox, the cucknary in the coal mine, and got a little lesson on the pointlessness of virtue signaling and what it can do to the career of a comedian. I'll end this with a tweet from Dick himself when I noticed that shitty video about InfoWars and the legacy media. I'm so glad Senpai noticed me. As one final note, I gathered a bunch of these screenshots from the Dick Show Reddit. While I'm not much of a Reddit user, this is one of the few boards I peruse. If you're a fan or just interested in the stuff I've talked about today, check it out. But first and foremost, if you're interested, check out the Dick Show podcast. It never fails to amuse me. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.
Cut.